In many of my videos, I've often talked about the typical outcome with men is that when logic and reason fail, the only thing left that men typically will resort to is violence. The reason being is because men know that when a reasonable agreement cannot be made, well, then the only thing that we will do as a result to settle disputes will typically lead to violence and bloodshed. This has been the history of man from its beginning. And it's why most men today recognize, women typically will hit men, and in society, we're taught, oh, not to hit women. But men understand that that was very different in the past. Women were not foolish enough to strike a man for fear of being struck back. Now, of course, in our time, that's a bit different, especially now we see a lot of women that are very abusive towards men. But men understand that that concept does not fit in with male versus male interactions. And so if you get into a disagreement with a man, usually you want to come to some sort of logical conclusion where either you will both walk away. But in scenarios where you can't, where another person is trying to exert their will over you, the only thing that remains left between men is violence. And so when you see stuff like this, we're going to listen to this video. It's about 2 minutes. Where this is the Victoria state government. This is basically the prime minister of the country. And at some point, we will more than likely see, civil wars breaking out in multiple nations. You just don't see the sort of totalitarian sort of grip that many of these other nations have over their people, because in America, Americans have guns. And so the American politicians have to tread very carefully. This is why I think of, if these other nations fall, America will eventually fall. The reason being is because if those countries' military don't need to be present in their land, then eventually what can happen is those military from other Western countries, like from Europe, from the North in Canada, right, they can eventually be utilized, because what the goal is basically to create some sort of one world government. And so when you have areas of compliance, you can then shift these resources into areas of non-compliance. Now, moving forward, we're going to take a look at this video, and then we're going to give a little bit of commentary. And it's important to understand that it can happen in places like America. We've already seen what's going on in places like Canada, which is literally to our north. You've seen what goes on in Europe and places like in France, in the UK, in Germany, etc., where this sort of totalitarian regimes are basically propping up. And these aren't different individuals. These are just the puppets that are put out in front, and they are enacting what the globalists are looking to bring about. Now, we can listen to what this gentleman here has to say, and then we'll comment.
From a situation where, to protect the health system, we've got everybody locked down, we're going to move to a situation where, to protect the health system, we're going to lock out people who are not vaccinated and can be. If you're making the choice not to get vaccinated, then you're making the wrong choice. You're making the wrong choice. And for safety's sake, and back to that point about how much work our nurses have to do, as this becomes absolutely a pandemic of the unvaccinated and we open everything up, it's not going to be safe for people who are not vaccinated to be roaming around the place spreading the virus. That's what they'll be doing. So there's every reason to get vaccinated. And there are appointments available, and there'll be even more appointments available throughout September, October, November. Let's get to those thresholds as fast as we possibly can. But yes, there's going to be a vaccinated economy, and you get to participate in that if you are vaccinated. Now, that's not right now, because of course there's many more people who want to get vaccinated than we actually can get through the system. But we're going to get to a point where everybody who can get vaccinated will have been offered the chance to do so. And we are not going to have a situation, well, at least not in Victoria, where we lock the whole place down to protect people who won't protect themselves. These go and get vaccinated. There's 11,000 AZ appointments available this week, 2,000 Pfizer appointments available this week. We'll have more to say with those additional stocks coming in from overseas, but I want to run that down to zero so there are no more AstraZeneca appointments, hopefully very soon, and we can order more and we can keep pushing that. I just again remind people, the Prime Minister has written to everybody who's 60 and over and indicated to them that you are eligible for AstraZeneca, and if you want Pfizer, then you will be in the queue behind everyone else. That is to say, you'll be in the queue behind 12-year-olds, because they can only get Pfizer.
And that is basically where Victoria is at in Australia. Basically, as he had stated, is that if you don't take it, well then we're going to keep you locked down. In fact, everybody is locked down right now. But moving forward, as he has stated that they're not going to lock down for these individuals who, as he stated, don't want to protect themselves. Now, of course, we've taken a look at Israel. The Israel data is very open for anybody to take a look at. And even in Israel, where they've shown that the vaccine does not do what is supposedly stated that it's supposed to do. You can just look at the numbers. These are easily verifiable, and we'll take a look at them right here. And so as you can see, looking at the data, right, this is the data for Israel in terms of new cases. As you can see, there are more cases now than there were when there was no vaccine. In fact, you can also look at the deaths. There are more deaths now in the beginning of September. We're looking at September 5th. And if we were to come over here to September 5th, the 7-day average is 16, right, back in 2020 where there was no vaccine. And then the 7-day average now is 31. You have almost double the amount of people who are dying, and a lot more people. The rolling day average is from the 5th is 9,400. And if we were to look at the 5th of September, the average was 2,216. So we have more than a threefold in cases. More than fourfold in cases, and almost double the deaths. And so for this individual to make these claims that, you know, we have a pandemic of the unvaccinated, it just doesn't stand, to the point where even now it says, this is according to the Times of Israel, it says virus czar calls to begin readying for the eventual 4th dose. And I said this before, if you're the person who took the double jab, and you can watch my video, I talked about this in another video, I'll link it up top. If you're the person who took the double jab and you say, I don't want to take the 3rd jab, well then in essence you become the new enemy. You see, in places where overwhelmingly the vast majority of the people have already taken it and are vaccinated, they don't have an unvaccinated population to point to and say, well, you see, it's their fault that we're having all these cases. The only people that they have left to point to are the people who are in essence are behind the curve, right? The double jabbed, right? So the triple jabbed are now turning on the double jabbed, and eventually the 4th, the people who had the vaccine for the 4th time will be turning on those who took it the 3rd time and say that they don't want to do this anymore, and so on and so on and so on till we get down to a certain point. But in certain areas, eventually what will happen is the call will go out to, this is the same thing that happened very much in Nazi Germany, where you create this fear and pitting of people against each other, to the point where, as he had stated here, that you're going to be left out of society. You will be left out of society. In places like France, they were not allowing the unvaccinated to go into supermarkets to buy food. And so at some point what happens is you get some of these people who are just completely on the side of the state and eventually call for the death. Now, of course, in Australia, I had made another video talking about how they're building what they refer to as accommodation camps, which are just internment camps. It's just a flowery phrase for the utilization of internment camps where they're going to house these individuals. So currently they allow you to stay in your home and they lock you down for 23 hours a day. If you have the vaccine, you get a whopping 1 more hour, which kind of defeats the purpose of, well, what's the point of still locking you down if you've already taken the vaccine, if, according to his logic that he just stated, that the vaccine works. If you've been vaccinated, then you should be able to freely move about. But it has nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with controlling people. And once you can get people on this little bit of a treadmill, and that's basically the hard part. The hard part with humans is getting them on board with this sort of treadmill behavior. And so when you're trying to shift multiple people's, cultures into one direction, you're going to have a hard time. Now, moving forward, if people don't comply, I would not be surprised if the call for the death of the unvaccinated were to begin talks of, where we need to do things for the betterment of society to move forward. That will be the narrative. Well, that we need to be able to move forward, so we need to leave these people behind. So it wouldn't surprise me if a narrative were to spring about in many of these different countries, where you were to start to see a little bit more of a revolution, where they would try to put these people down. Now, in places where they don't have weapons, you would see mass casualties, as the government, I have no doubt, would utilize the military to try
Defiant,
to put these individuals down, very much like what you
undaunted,
saw happen in
armed
Myanmar,
with
where the
slingshots
Myanmar military
and
were
wooden
literally
sticks.
gunning their own citizens down.
They scream in protest as the bullets continue to fly. Street battles sprung up in over 40 towns and cities, some sheltered behind makeshift barriers in their neighbourhoods, but the gunfire at times appeared relentless. Attempts were made to save as many lives as possible, the applause here offering hope to these makeshift medics. But casualties, including children, were reported across the country, making it the bloodiest day since the army seized power on February the 1st. The military turned in its own people on what was supposed to be a national holiday to honour the armed forces.
And in that scenario, you have to be more like guerrilla warfare. You can't just, go head to head with armed individuals. You then have to go about the old ways, crafting weapons, using old school swords, shields, and bows, and then try to gain some of the weapons. Very much like what happened in Afghanistan, right? You had the old Afghan military that had old weapons from the Russian war, which took place in the 70s, who were fighting against the modern American military. But as you saw, for many years later, that they were able to push these people back. Why? Because they wanted to maintain their culture, and then the people never assimilated. And that was the reason why America failed both in Vietnam as well as in Afghanistan, where in Vietnam they were literally fighting against rice farmers. But how were they able to win? They were able to win via the utilization of guerrilla warfare tactics. And most American military, especially because as more military men, like you've seen recently, kind of are not with this sort of woke agenda, they get outed. They get outed and they get removed, or they remove themselves. And so the only people that are left to fill those slots are other members that are on the left. You see the same thing in government, where I talked about this with Cuomo. Once Cuomo stopped playing ball, well, then he was no longer useful to the left, and so he had a disgraceful exit. They disgracefully exited him, which is what they want to do with many of the U.S. military who do not want to take the jab. There are about 800,000 soldiers who do not want to take the jab, and they've threatened them with what's it called? Military discharge. What's it called? I can't think of the word. Where you get disgracefully dismissed from the military, and of course that has implications for you to be able to get a job, because you've basically been removed from the military. I forget what the phrase is, and I'm sure it'll come to me later on. But in any event, what happens is then you start to fill those slots with those who are loyal to you, and this is the vacuum that this mentality creates. Eventually, what happens is it always leads to war. Just look back at history. It will always lead to war, whether it's against race or it's against religion. or if it's different, ideologies, it always ends up the same way, where people end up dying. And so don't be surprised if you start to see these things moving forward in areas where there is a lack of compliance. And I would say, like, the reason why you don't see a lot of this stuff in America primarily is because Americans have guns. And the left know that if they push the right too far, that the right will just wipe them out. The problem is that most people who are on the right, most conservatives, are not revolutionaries. And the left knows this. You've seen it with your politicians. You have a lot of people sitting here like, where the hell's the Republican Party? And it's because the Republican Party are not revolutionaries. Eventually, what will happen in a scenario like that is the right that exists now will be removed. They'll be removed for not doing what the people have asked them to do, which is to defend them. And you'll see new individuals who will take leadership. Usually it will be military men. But we are not there yet. The people have to experience enough pain before they're willing to put their lives on the line, like what you're seeing in many of these other countries where they're constantly marching and protesting by the thousands. You may not see it on TV, but if you're on social media, more than likely you will come across a clip of tens of thousands of people marching. But marching is, like I've said it in talking when I talked about that video in Cuba, the purpose of a protest is just to show how many people you have that are on your side, to get your opposing side to perhaps rethink the situation. When that doesn't work, the next step is always violence. And if you're not willing to go that route, you've already failed. Okay, so you're going to leave it there. We will continue to pay attention to what is going on overseas, because of course eventually it will impact us here in the United States. But we'll leave it here for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.